Hello, everyone, and thanks for streaming with us. I'm Alexis Christoforous. Rushing out of Russia with more major escalations by Vladimir Putin in the war in Ukraine. Thousands of men look to escape the country after Putin called up 300,000 reservists. Cars lining up for miles at the border. This with Russia's referendum votes happening now to declare occupied regions as part of Russia. Deadly demonstrations, the seventh day of anti-government protests in Iran, the largest in years, after a 22-year-old woman died in police custody after being arrested for wearing a headscarf improperly. And House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy has unveiled an agenda that he says the House GOP would follow should it retake control of the chamber after this year's midterms. But what does the White House have to say about it? We'll talk with the Deputy Communications Director of the White House about just this in moments. We begin with Russia holding referendum votes to officially recognize occupied Ukrainian territory as Russian, a major escalation of the war in Ukraine. Meanwhile, we're seeing extraordinary scenes of Russians fleeing, lined up at the border for hours after Vladimir Putin's order to call up more troops. Foreign correspondent Tom Burridge has the latest from Ukraine.
Russia staging referendum votes in parts of Ukraine occupied by its troops, moving to declare that Ukrainian land as part of Russia. With the Russian military campaign in Ukraine failing, this a major escalation by Vladimir Putin. And with the Kremlin bringing in a draft, Russian men rushing out of Russia. Long lines at the Russian border with neighboring Georgia, people scared of being forced to fight. With flights out of Moscow selling out for days, according to a travel data company. Putin's draft already in motion. Relatives in Moscow saying goodbye. President Zelensky making an appeal in Russian, laying out the options of survival for new Russian recruits. Protest, fight back, run away, or surrender to Ukrainian captivity, he says. And in newly liberated areas, Ukrainian forces clearing up the remnants of Russia's occupation. Here, Ukrainian soldiers towing away tanks abandoned by Russian troops when they fled Izium in the northeast, revealing a mass burial site in the forest nearby. In the city, Russian flags now in the trash and used as a doormat at the entrance to the mayor's office. The Ukrainian authorities back, but challenges here acute.
Well, you can hear and see how desperate these people are for humanitarian aid. They've been living under Russian occupation for months, and they still live close to the front line.
Waiting in line, Tanya, a mum collecting food.
Tanya, what was life like under the Russians?
It was unbearable, she tells us. The Russians would just appear, point a gun at you, and threaten to shoot.
Alexis, Russia's military draft appears to be much broader than the partial draft outlined by Vladimir Putin. One man in eastern Russia telling ABC News that large numbers of men in rural areas are being served with draft papers. There is real opposition to conscription in Russia right now. Putin has taken a big risk. Alexis?
All right, Tom Burridge in Ukraine, thank you. Meanwhile, in Iran, thousands of people are taking to the streets in anti-government protests following the death of a 22-year-old woman in police custody, arrested by Tehran's morality police for not wearing her headscarf correctly. Now the demonstrations are turning deadly as security forces clash with protesters. ABC Chief Global Affairs correspondent Martha Raddatz has the latest.
The seventh day of protests sweeping across Iran, prompted by the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini. Amini died in the custody of the so-called morality police after her arrest last week for wearing a headscarf improperly. This edited footage, released by Iranian authorities on September 16th, allegedly showing Amini in custody, walking up to someone, then collapsing. The next shot showing her taken out on a stretcher to an ambulance. We do not see how she was treated prior to the incident. Iranian officials saying she suffered a heart attack from a previous health condition, but Amini's father calling that a lie, saying she had no prior health issues and was killed at the hands of police. Strict Islamic law in Iran requires women to cover their hair, but Amini's death galvanizing women cutting their hair and burning their hijabs. All of it with great risk. At least 15 protesters have been killed in clashes with the police. President Biden on the world stage voicing his support for protesters.
We stand with the brave citizens and the brave women of Iran who right now are demonstrating to secure their basic rights.
The administration issuing sanctions in response to the incident and other human rights violations, calling on the Iranian government to end its systemic persecution of women and allow peaceful protest. Iranian authorities, meanwhile, threatening those who protest and restricting internet access, with widespread outages reported, part of an effort to curb the protests. ABC News pressing the ultra-conservative Iranian president Ibrahim Raisi in New York.
What are you afraid the world is going to see?
President Raisi saying it is an incident that is being investigated. Our utmost preoccupation is the safeguarding of rights. President Raisi has been in office just a little over a year, and this kind of crackdown was expected. But I've watched Iran change over the years, women testing the limits with headscarves, brightly colored clothing, and generally pushing back on these restrictions. But Iran does not tolerate dissent, so I expect this to get bloodier in the coming days. Alexis?
Martha Raddatz, thank you. The chairman of the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack on the Capitol says the committee is set to hold its final hearing next week. Congressman Benny Thompson says the hearing will feature substantial footage of the riot and significant witness testimony that hasn't previously been released, but he declined to divulge any details or the topic. Now, previous hearings have featured several former aides and associates of former President Trump saying he knew he lost the 2020 election and that he also knew protesters in Washington were armed that day, but still urged them to march to the Capitol. Trump has denied wrongdoing and said the committee is politically motivated. Here's a look back at some of those past highlights.
Donald Trump, President of the United States, spurred a mob of domestic enemies of the Constitution.
Declaring it a riot.
To march down the Capitol and subvert American democracy. January 6th was the culmination of an attempted coup. Violence was no accident. It represents Trump's last stand.
Because if Mike Pence does the right thing, we win the election.
Most desperate chance to halt the transfer of power.
Between Election Day and January 6th, the Trump campaign sent millions of fundraising emails to Trump supporters and encouraged them to, quote, fight back.
The government did this to us. We were normal, good, law-abiding citizens, and you guys did this to us.
All hell is going to break loose tomorrow.
President Trump summoned the mob, assembled the mob, and lit the flame of this attack.
We fight like hell, and if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. We're going to walk down to the Capitol.
After he spent hours watching a violent mob besiege, attack, and invade our Capitol, Donald Trump tweeted that he did not condemn the attack. Instead, he justified it.
We had an election that was stolen from us. It was a landslide election, and everyone knows it, especially the other side.
I made it clear I did not agree with the idea of saying the election was stolen and putting out this stuff, which I told the president was.
The reality is there was no dispute. Joseph Biden won the presidency. Period. Full stop.
But Trump supporters didn't believe that.
Because they work for us. They don't get to steal it from us.
We just had protesters T-circle, breach the line. We need backup. You're compliant, but this is now effectively a riot. You're going to die tonight.
Still difficult to see those images of our Capitol. ABC News investigative reporter Catherine Falders joining me now. So, Catherine, we have seen a number of bombshells come out of the previous hearings with the promise of substantial footage, significant witness testimony. What should we expect next week as they wrap up?
So, look, it's unclear right now if there will be any live witnesses specifically at this next hearing. We expect this to be a recap of sorts in part. Right. They will take us through the day of January 6th again, Trump's desire to go to the Capitol, for example. And we know that during the August recess, when the House was out for about a month, investigators worked behind the scenes. They interviewed additional witnesses in videotaped depositions, some of those being cabinet secretaries in Trump's administration. We could see some more of that. We could also see more sound bites and more clips, for example, from Trump's former White House counsel, Pat Cipollone. That's what we should expect at this point. You heard Thompson. He said to reporters earlier this week that there should be more video that will be shown. But the big questions here are, do they ask ultimately Trump, do they invite Trump to speak with them under oath publicly? That's something they're discussing behind the scenes. We also know that they have negotiated terms of an interview behind closed doors with the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, with Ginny Thomas, who is exchanging text messages with people at the White House, who has communicated with state officials specifically on overturning the election in that particular state. That's something else to watch. We don't think that interview will happen before next week's hearing, so we probably won't see clips then. But after this hearing, their work is winding down, but those are the big questions, the big outstanding questions. We also could see some sort of report about their findings in the next couple months as well.
So, look, the committee has shown compelling evidence and testimony implicating President Trump in the attack on the Capitol, but so far the Justice Department has not brought any charges against him. Why is that? And could we see that happen down the line?
So the committee and the DOJ are obviously conducting investigations that are similar in nature, but very separate in terms of the way they're conducting them. Now, we know from DOJ that they just 2 weeks ago issued another round of subpoenas to nearly 40 people in Trump's orbit, people who still work for him, former White House and campaign officials, top aides, for example. Their investigation is very much still in full swing here. They're still talking to lots of people close to them. There's still questions about his former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, for example, who had provided text messages to the congressional committee. So again, I think they're still very much in full swing here. When the congressional investigation essentially winds down and wraps up, we still will see a lot of investigating on the part of the Justice Department.
I am sure. And of course, another story we're watching closely, the documents seized by the FBI at the former president's Florida home. So the judge has now laid out a timeline for the DOJ to get electronic copies of the materials not labeled classified by Monday. What's the latest there, Catherine?
And so what the special master has also asked for is for Trump's lawyers to go through all of these documents and essentially say whether they would label them privileged in any way, whether that's executive privilege, attorney-client privilege. And if they do, then they have to lay out an explanation as to why they believe that. This will be interesting because Trump has been saying a lot of things publicly. He's claimed he's declassified some of the documents. He's claimed in some interviews that the FBI potentially planted evidence. Well, now the special master is essentially asking Trump's lawyers to say on the record in court whether any of this is true. So while he doesn't have the classified information, and while that is off limits here to Trump's team and to the special master, they still are going to have to detail these claims. Now, of course, Trump has denied any wrongdoing here, but at the end of the day, what his lawyers have been arguing in court, or not arguing, is different than what he's saying publicly. So they are going to have to put this on the record in some form.
For sure, lots to watch for next week. Catherine Faulders, thank you. And be sure to catch the debut of our special, The Committee, Attack on the Capitol, the investigation, tonight at 8:30 p.m. Eastern, right here on ABC News Live, and tomorrow on Hulu. Coming up, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy has unveiled an agenda that he says the House GOP would follow should it retake control of the chamber after this year's midterms. But just what does the White House have to say about it? We'll talk with the Deputy Communications Director right after this. Welcome back. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy is rolling out his agenda for the House GOP as the party looks to take over control of Congress this November. The plan, dubbed the Commitment to America, marks McCarthy's most concrete attempt yet to outline a policy agenda to persuade voters ahead of the election. Principal Deputy White House Communications Director Kate Berner joining me now live for more on this. Thank you so much for being with us, Kate. So, look, McCarthy's unveiling this plan today in Pittsburgh alongside a few dozen colleagues, including some far-right firebrands like Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia, but also New York moderate Representative John Katko, who is retiring after voting to impeach former President Donald Trump. Where does the White House see this plan on the political spectrum? Would it appeal to moderate or independent voters?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Alexis. As you said, Leader McCarthy in Pittsburgh today outlined his and House Republicans' ultra-MAGA agenda for the country. It criminalizes doctors and nurses who perform abortions, whether that's for miscarriage care or to save the health of the mother. They've said their first priority is repealing the Inflation Reduction Act, increasing seniors' prescription drug prices, increasing health care premiums for millions of Americans across the country. And they're putting Social Security and Medicare on the chopping block, threatening to privatize Social Security, slashing benefits. In fact, by the last check I saw before coming out here, Leader McCarthy and the Republican members of Congress today didn't even mention Social Security or Medicare in their discussion today. So we think this is an extreme ultra-MAGA agenda that's out of touch with where Americans all across the country are. It's a very different agenda from the one the president has put forward to lower costs, create jobs, and build an economy that works for working families around the country.
So, Kate, does the White House agree with any part of the GOP plan as it stands?
So I think there's a huge difference in the approach of the president and congressional Democrats and congressional Republicans. As the president has said, we've been able to work with Republicans in Congress in a few places, like the bipartisan infrastructure law, the CHIPS and Science Act. And that's important. The president promised that he was going to work with Republicans in Congress where he could, but the vision that we're seeing put forward today by Leader McCarthy is extreme. It's ultra-MAGA, and it's out of touch with what Americans around the country are looking for, and it's just very, very different from the vision that the president has put forward, and we believe that a majority of Americans around the country agree with.
So this GOP plan also highlights economic goals. You know that some economists are saying the U.S. may be headed for recession. Does the White House disagree with that assessment? And is the economy continuing to be an Achilles heel for Democrats as we move closer to the midterms?
So no, I don't think the economy is an Achilles heel for the president, for congressional Democrats. I'm here on the North Lawn. I'm not going to get into politics too much, but the president has a strong economic record. We've created nearly 10 million jobs. Unemployment claims are at near historic lows. Businesses are investing in America. The president was at a groundbreaking at Intel yesterday here at the White House. We had mayors and local elected officials from North Carolina, where Wolfspeed, a company, is expanding their manufacturing in the Tar Heel state. Small business starts, more people are starting small businesses than at any point in history, and prices are decreasing for families across the country. We've had 14 straight weeks this summer of gas prices declining. We're going to build on that progress with the Inflation Reduction Act. We're going to give people more breathing room in their health care premiums, their energy costs, their prescription drugs. You're going to hear the president later today and all month talking about his economic record, all the work we've done and accomplished, and the more work we have to do to continue growing an economy that builds the economy from the bottom up and middle out.
You talk about falling gas prices. Despite that, inflation's still near a 40-year high. Fed Chair Powell said recently there's no painless way to bring down inflation. What more can the administration do in terms of bringing down energy costs, especially now as the country heads into the winter? And is there anything at all the administration can do to help folks when it comes to high food costs?
Yeah, so it's a good question. As I said, gas prices have fallen this summer for 14 straight weeks. That's important breathing room for families across the country. The administration is making clean energy more affordable, more available around the country. The president was at the Detroit Auto Show talking about electric vehicles, which are booming around the country, the charging stations that we're building across the country thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law. There's funding to help people with weatherization to make their homes hold heat and air, lowering their energy bills. And of course, the Inflation Reduction Act is going to help lower families' energy bills by about $500 a year as well. So these are all important progress in reducing families' energy costs, but we're going to keep going. We're going to keep pushing. The Fed is independent. They'll continue to take whatever action that they determine to take, but we're going to continue to implement these important bills that are giving families more breathing room, lowering costs across the board.
All right, Kate Berner, live outside the White House. Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up, some hit movies. They're making a comeback as more and more people return to the theaters. So which ones are seeing the daylight again? Here live with ABC News. Don't go anywhere. Some hit movies are making a comeback as more and more people return to the theaters. Avatar is being re-released in theaters ahead of the debut of its sequel. And director James Cameron says if you haven't seen Avatar on the big screen, you haven't really seen it. Chris Connolly is here with more about why studios are reaching back into the vault.
This family is our fortress. As fans still pour over the tantalizing trailer for James Cameron's Avatar: The Way of Water, the groundbreaking, long-in-production sequel awaiting its worldwide debut in theaters this December 16th.
I need your help.
The movie that started it all, 2009's Avatar, making a heralded return to the big screen this weekend. Cameron eager to acquaint a new generation of moviegoers with its one-of-a-kind visuals.
See Avatar the way it was meant to be seen. On the big screen.
Crowned the all-time box office champ after its initial theatrical run, the 3D Avatar reaffirmed Cameron's unparalleled ability to marry imagination and a powerful story with cutting-edge technology on screen. As it primes the audience interest pump for Avatar: The Way of Water, Avatar's re-release is part of a movie mini-trend. Hits of the recent past returning to theaters, grabbing additional box office via the buzz that was.
Hello, Peter.
11 minutes of extra footage gave the 2021 blockbuster Spider-Man: No Way Home a new lease on theatrical life earlier this month.
Well, you don't look like a bodyguard.
This is my disguise.
And November will give fans of The Bodyguard a chance to gather in celebration of its 30th anniversary. As fans await the December release, I Want to Dance with Somebody, director Casey Lemon's biopic of Whitney Houston. This weekend, meanwhile, Avatar offers that full-throttle opportunity to savor the world of the Na'vi, readying viewers for the further adventures of The Way of Water, the magic only movies can provide.
This is an era when people can feel secure and safe in coming back to the movies. And what they really want to show people is, hey, as a part of that, let's give you some old favorites. Let's give you some hits that you love and feel comfortable with.
Lots of good stuff to look forward to there. Thanks to Chris Connolly for that report. And I'm Alexis Christoforous. Stay with us. ABC News Live continues with more news, context, and analysis.
It is this nation's faith in a more perfect union that allows a Puerto Rican girl from the Bronx to stand here now. I am struck again today by the wonder of my own life and the life we in America are so privileged to lead.
I, Sonia Sotomayor, do solemnly swear.
I, Sonia Sotomayor, do solemnly swear
that I will administer justice without respect to persons.
That I will administer justice without respect to persons.
And do equal right to the poor and to the rich.
And do equal right to the poor and to the rich.
And that I will faithfully and impartially.
And that I will faithfully and impartially.
Discharge and perform.
Discharge and perform.
All the duties incumbent upon me.
All of the duties incumbent upon me.
As Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States.
As an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.